Hey, I'm Riley with TekRek. I'm just gonna turn off the music here. Hopefully everybody's having a great day today. It's a beauty. We were just talking kind of backstage, and it's a absolutely beautiful day in Toronto anyway. Sunny and 11 above. Can't ask for anything better. But thank you all for spending your I guess your early evening here with us, kind of in the third installment for the TekRek Speaker Series. So real quick blurb on TekRek, then that's all done. But basically, TekRek is a niche IT recruitment firm. We specialize in recruiting software engineering roles, data science, product manager, DevOps, infrastructure, kind of any technical role. We work a lot with like Series A, B, C tech firms, right? So the whole purpose of today's event is to kind of provide a forum where people feel comfortable to kind of like learn and develop their skills. So we've got like a really awesome lineup of presenters today, and kind of to give some background for those of you who maybe haven't come to these events in the past. The reason why we actually do this, right? So last year, I guess the last 3 years have totally been something like I've never seen in my kind of my recruitment career here, right? We had COVID, the market kind of completely stops, and then afterwards, it's like this excess amount of hiring, and then in the kind of the position where we're at right now, where there's been a decrease and a normalizing, so as we had more time, we were like, well, we want to kind of create an event that can like give back to the community a little bit. So that's why we started the speaker series. This is the third kind of installment in that. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just an opportunity to kind of learn and develop ourselves and kind of grow our careers and move them forward. So that's kind of a little bit of context about tonight. I'll give you a bit of an agenda, then we'll talk some housekeeping, and then we'll just get right into the good stuff, right? So for tonight's agenda, for tonight's event, we've got three speakers, and they're going to share a little bit of their own journey, but also give their insights on how to become like a staff or principal engineer. The event's going to last roughly an hour, hour and a half. Each speaker will present, and then there'll be time for Q&A afterwards. I really do want, as you know, obviously I want to invite people to ask as much from a Q&A perspective as possible. I think the speakers will speak first, and then at the end, there'll be times for Q&A. But I want this to be kind of more back and forth. So if you do have any questions that you're looking for, please do let us know and put them in the chat there. So that's kind of the event length. In terms of the speakers, first up is going to be Michael Welsh. He's a staff engineer at Faire. Second speaker is Izaaz Yunus. He's a staff engineer, software engineer at Amplitude. And then the final speaker is Chris Price, senior staff engineer at Antimatter. Now, before we get to the action, I do want to just kind of share some housekeeping rules. So, or not rules, but housekeeping. Basically, top right part of your screen, you'll see kind of the profile button. I recommend kind of adding a picture if you want. You can also add some information. You should be able to add some information there in terms of your kind of like name, title, LinkedIn. Some people who are hiring maybe at this event as well. So if you're looking, it's always a good opportunity to kind of have that information up there. And then for questions, I alluded to it. So we've got the chat here, basically that people can use. So that's just kind of for general conversation. But if you got any questions, the questions would go into the actual question box. And those will be answered at the end of the presentation. Oh, hello. Hey, good to, thank you. I love it. And so that's kind of where the questions will go. And then the final thing is just like, yeah, like let's have fun and like don't be shy to ask questions along the way and whatnot. So that's it for housekeeping. I've said my piece. I'm going to hand it over to Michael. So I'm going to bring Michael up to the stage after giving him a little bit of an introduction. So Michael, first speaker, he's a staff engineer at Faire. So after graduating university, Michael joined Google as a mobile developer where he spent about 3.5 years. After leaving Google, he joined Ritual where he was one of the founding dev members, and he went on a wild ride. I believe the company went from about 5 to 300 at its peak during his time there. So he saw a lot of interesting problems, I'm sure. And then about a year ago, he joined Faire. So Faire is a marketplace and wholesale platform that helps retailers find and buy wholesale merchandise for their stores. And at Faire, he works on the mobile platform and works on infrastructure for mobile engineers and coding patterns. He focuses on problems that help their mobile teams be more effective and fight less with technology. So without any further ado, I will bring Michael to the stage here. Sorry. And there we are. There we are. Okay, well, there's Michael's presentation, and there's Michael. So you're all good, Michael?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Riley. Yep, I'm good. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike or Michael. Like Riley said, I'm a staff engineer at Faire, working on the mobile side of things. So thanks again for having me and allowing me to sort of share my experiences and what I've seen. So what I'm going to talk about is, what we're here for is how to become a staff engineer, or sort of what does it look like being a staff engineer. And to do that, I think it's important to first take a look at what are kind of levels that we typically see in engineering organizations. And I think this is important because if we look at what the expectations are as levels go up and people get careers, what we're really looking at is growing impact. And when you're going from engineer one up to senior engineer, that's typically done through improving your technical ability in your craft, and that can be in any kind of engineering. So that could be mobile, that can be web, that can be back end, DevOps, but it's really focused on the technical problems and solving it. And as you progress in sort of the first couple levels, the expectations there are typically that you're getting better at it, you're more proficient at it, you can do these things faster, that you have less questions, and that you can mentor others and things like that. So there's really a focus on improving your technical ability, and then as you continue to progress, though, the expectation is to continue. And it's not necessarily that technical growth has diminishing returns, but to have an increasing impact, there's other skills that typically need to start to be developed or worked on to show the kind of impact and the growth there. So I'm going to be talking a lot about what I think that looks like at a staff level, and how to sort of achieve some of these things in ways that to look at it. So and I want to keep in mind, I'm going to preface all this with, this is really dependent as well on like the size of the company and where you're working, right? So a small company is going to have very different needs than a large company. And it's important to keep that in mind. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's important. So if I look at, a staff engineer and how you might want to continue to grow your impact, I'm going to start with these bullet points, and then I'm going to talk about a little more background on them. So I think, and they build off each other in my opinion. So I think being proactive is the sort of, to me, one of the biggest things. And then when you're being proactive and identifying typically problems with that skill set, usually ambiguous problems, and then working with teams to create solutions for those problems and helping to scope the work from those solutions for teams or multiple teams to work on in projects, and then contributing to setting team or pillar or group goals. And so going back to sort of the beginning of this, why I think it's important to be proactive, and one of the things that I see from a lot of successful staff engineers is that at that level, you're starting to identify and try and help with, solving problems for your team or wider scope. And typically at more junior levels, problems are enough that the expectation is, here's what we'd like to build, here's what we want to do, please go create it. I think at a staff plus level, you're starting to also identify, like, I see things that are not great, how can we do that better? And identifying issues that can be done and solved in better ways, or things that your team is doing that you can have changes to that's going to improve them. And this is where we see the sort of the higher impact, right? Identifying these problems and helping more than just yourself or your project, but sort of a wider team or wider set of people. And again, it's really important to keep in mind that the size of the company, it matters, and doing this in alignment with company goals. So again, so being proactive, identifying the problems, like working on solutions for these problems. And I think this is a really collaborative thing. So it's not necessarily that you have to come up with the entire solution on yourself, but if you identify an issue, then maybe the next thing to do is to work with your team and some other teams in terms of how you might want to go about resolving those issues. And this is where building consensus is really important, right? So if you identify a problem and go and fix it and come up with a solution and deliver it, but then no one wanted it, that's not a good use of your time. It's not a good use of other people's time too. So it's really important to get that consensus. And that's not to say that you need to wait for someone to tell you what to do. You can be proactive. You can go say, hey, I recognize the teams, and I'm going to make sure that this is something that, you know, we can work on together. And you don't need necessarily consensus on how it's going to be solved, but the direction and like how you want to like move and towards a solution. I think from there, the next, you know, thing is to take that sort of direction and scope that down into problems or projects. And this is really, you know, collaborative work. If it's a product feature, maybe working with product managers. If it's really technically focused on like team improvements or team velocity or team process, working with other senior engineers, other staff engineers to turn this, you know, ambiguous problem you've identified with a direction and take that and turn it into like a project that can be broken down and distributed, you know, among yourself and other engineers. So I think it's important to recognize that, you know, at a staff plus level, you're not going to be solving all the problems yourself. You're really going to, you know, need to be working with the team and lots of other people. And so it's really, you know, you need to empower doing this. And so you're not, you know, you're not a one person team. You need to really be, this is where the collaboration and consensus comes in. So having said all that, I think that this, you know, when you take these things together, and it puts you in a really unique position. If you're identifying these problems, you're coming up with, you know, consensus and direction for how to solve these things, you're helping breaking it down into scope. It really puts you in a great position to be contributing to setting goals for your teams as well, and team OKRs if you use OKRs, objectives and key results. So if this is something that, you know, your company does, then you can be contributing to that and helping to sort of set direction for your team and possibly other teams or like, you know, adjacent teams. And that can be, you know, super impactful in terms of saying, here's what we, you know, we want to deliver and we want to do in this, you know, this quarter. And again, this all ties back to as long as it's sort of in alignment with company goals and company direction and all that kind of stuff. So when you do that, then it sort of has the impact of like across a team. So I think that's sort of, you know, I would say one of the most important things is start with being proactive and build from there into these other things. I'm going to provide some examples of things I've seen in the past. My examples are mostly going to be mobile focused because that's my background, but these can apply to all sorts of things. So, you know, like let's say you have a task that, you know, you have an analytics definition file, and to generate content, you know, every time someone adds a new definition, you have to go and run this thing manually. Well, what if you could automate that, right? Like you can look at the impact of that. How is that going to save developer time? And does it make it easier for other people to do? Probably if you don't have to do this manually anymore, you don't have to worry about it. So that's one thing to do. Another thing you can be proactively doing is identifying and adopting new technologies for your team or evaluating them. And that can come in different perspectives. So if you're really focusing on team infrastructure and team performance, then maybe you're looking at, again, from a mobile perspective, like Android Studio or Xcode, what's coming up that's going to help your team make things faster or better. If you're looking at a product focus, you know, maybe you're proactively looking at, well, what are the features coming out in iOS or the latest Android? And saying, okay, hey, you know, how can we roll some of these things into our products and our features? Like, how does this make sense? And this might be where you partner with a product manager or other teams. And so, you know, some examples might be like when they added QR code scanning to the camera, right? Is that something that your app or your product could leverage? Or universal links, things like that. Some less technical stuff that I've seen that I think can have impact as well is really focusing on like some process stuff. So not necessarily super technical, but it's still important to organizations and teams. You know, mobile release process. How often do you release your apps? What does it look like for that? If you don't have a design doc review process, if you're a very small company that hasn't grown a lot yet, that can be something that might be important. As well as, you know, if you have, hey, I think this would be a really great product idea, partnering with a product manager to like deliver something like that, right? So again, I think a lot of this stems from, in my opinion, being proactive. And I think that's, to me, where a lot of it starts and where, you know, you can sort of see a difference. Your work never ends as a staff engineer. You're always sort of identifying problems and things to work on. And the last thing I'm going to talk about for a few minutes here, what does it look like to sort of continue to grow that impact? And so, you know, this is staff level start to being proactive. And so if we kind of continue on that path and extrapolate, what does that look like? And so to senior staff or principal level. So you're continuing to grow your impact, and this can be at a company. And typically, again, company size is going to matter a lot here in terms of expectations and what that looks like. But you're looking across a company. So that could be, defining strategies for what the whole company is doing in terms of like, are you a multi-service or mono-service company? If you are a multi-service company, like what are the rules? What do you define as a service? How do they interact with each other? You might be looking at things like, and again, I'm a mobile engineer, so data strategy, but like, what do your data pipelines look like? Are you using a database or a NoSQL strategy? And like, the rules for that across the entire company to build that consistency. And those are the kinds of things you can see. And you can also do this outside of, necessarily your own company, but you can also see leaders in sort of the open source community that are providing, again, a very large impact, right? On different open source projects. So, there's people that are pushing for open API and definitions and things like that. And those are also great ways to have a very large and growing impact that as an industry expert, if you're part of these projects, you can have that impact that your company can also participate in if it's something that they have a vested interest in. So, um, I know I've been talking for about 10 minutes now, and this is what I had to share, but I'd love to take a few minutes to answer any questions. I know I tend to talk very quickly, so if there's anything I can repeat or share, I'd love to do that. So,
Cool. Thank you very much, Michael. So claps, applause, everybody. That really interesting presentation. In terms of some questions, we've got a couple here right now, but please, everyone, if you do have some questions, please feel free to ask them now. Now would definitely be the time. I'll pin the first one here. So Harish asked, ambiguous problems often have ambiguous solutions with uncertain time estimates. Yak shaving comes up when you least expect it. Do you recommend prototyping solutions before approaching other teams to solve problems together? Is there a risk of reputational damage if your proposed initiatives take much longer than expected?
yes, so I think that you typically want to go in at least with the direction that you want to take a problem in, right? So you identify a problem, you say, I think that this is a way that I'd like to solve it. You definitely do run a risk of reputational damage if it takes like a lot longer than you expect. There's always a part of, trying to solve these things and saying, look, I think it might take a month, but let's be safe here and let's say a month and a half for whatever issues that might come up, right? And that's part of the solutioning part, right? So there's direction, getting consensus, and then as you build out the solution, you should get a lot more clarity on like what that looks like. And if you say, you know what, this problem is way bigger than we thought, you can reevaluate, right? And you can change from there. So I do recommend that you have an intent of where you want to take it before you go and start talking to people. But you don't need to know what the final like answer looks like to that problem.
Okay, perfect. Oh, we got a heart. So thank you very much for that, Michael. And then James had another question. Basically, James' question, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you first joined Ritual, like what advice would you give yourself?
That's a great question. Uh, I don't know if I would give myself any specific advice. I think maybe diversify a little bit of my skill sets. I really focused on just doing like pure iOS for a long time. And I think when I started to branch out, I got to learn a lot more about a lot of things. I got a lot more into API development, really understanding all that stuff. So I think, there's value in diversifying what you know about and what you understand. It doesn't mean you have to become an expert in it, but it does allow you to gain more perspective and have more to contribute to discussions about, what does good API design look like? What does mobile API design look like? If you've never built, any backend code or any network code, then your perspective is going to be limited to sort of being consumer of that API as opposed to building it. So I think that's what I would tell my be a lot more proactive in gaining that perspective. I think it will help you with solving all sorts of different problems as well.
Awesome. Yeah, no doubt. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump around now. I saw Aaron's question. So Aaron was asking, like, how much impact does size or growth of the company have on your growth from senior to staff plus? Oh, great question. Do you have advice on how to identify the companies that have that avenue of growth?
Yeah, I think that really depends on each individual, and this is something I'll touch on a bit. Having left Google to join a startup, I think that everyone has different ways that they learn and they grow, and what's going to help them do best. And some people is like learn by doing, and so joining a to do a lot of different things is going to accelerate that. Some people prefer to have more structured mentorship or support and documentation and like good tooling, and that's where larger companies are really going to help out with doing that. So um, if you learn by doing, then a company that's growing or a small company is probably a great place to do that. If you learn by having mentorship and guidance and direction, a large company is probably a better fit.
Mhm.
And so I think, how do you identify that? I think it's very personal to like what you want to do and how you want to grow. And I would say to be, one of the things that I've learned with joining Faire is to be very intentional about where you're going to work, because it's going to be different. And, if it's not a good fit, there's nothing wrong with that, but be mindful that it does happen.
Mm, interesting. Yeah. And Martin had a question about mentors because, like, obviously you're mentioning being intentional. Like, have you had any mentors? And like, if so, like, how do you even go about arranging that?
Yeah, very fortunate at Ritual joining as basically day one. So my mentor was like our head of technology there, who I worked with, and he founded. He's one of the co-founders at Ritual, and so I basically worked directly with him for a lot of my time there, which was a great way to get direct mentorship by doing
Mhm.
that. I think having transitioned to Fair in the last year, they have a more explicit mentor program that they've set up and that they
Mm.
run. And so they have it, and they encourage it both ways, right? I have someone who is my mentor, and I'm also mentoring other people. And so it's structured in the sense so that everyone is learning and growing. Um, I personally haven't really reached out beyond my personal network for mentors. I know that that's a thing people do, and if it's something you're interested in, I would recommend looking into it. But I've leveraged sort of the community that I've been a part of where I've been working. So at Google, it was our tech leads for our teams and stuff like that.
Mhm.
For me,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Great. Great. Like, it's always tough, right? Like, how to find a mentor. You're very fortunate. Like at like Ritual, at Google, at Fair. It sounds like at Fairs, there's like a system in place. But I think you just got to go to events and kind of network and get to know people. Obviously, in your own organization, that would be a great one, and the easiest route, anyways. But sometimes if that's not available, it's like I think going to like events like TechTO or something where you're actually meeting people is like a great option for that. At least building a bit of rapport. Um, and then Mike had a follow-up question. So I forget to what answer, but he's like, as a follow-up question to your comment on diversifying your skill set. Yeah. Is it better to become a generalist as you become more senior? So like, i.e. a jack of all trades or like a master of some?
that really will depend on what you're trying to do and where you're working, I think. So if you're working at a company that, say, as an example, let's say it's like a consultancy firm that builds mobile apps, well, then you're probably going to want to be really specialized in mobile apps, right? But if you're at a
Mm,
company that does, data analysis, then you probably want to be more specialized in that kind of stuff. And I think, depending on what the company does is and where you want to work is really going to influence that. I think having some diversity is really important to understand how different problems are solved. Like I will tell you that I know very little about, like, I understand SQL and I can write a little bit of it, but if you wanted me to go set up like a database connector in a back end, I'd have a really hard time doing that.
mm,
And so I think it depends on where you want to be and what you want to be working
okay. Yeah, good answer. Thank you. Okay, trucking along. Susanna wrote, let me bring that one up. A lot of times, she reads that it's best to job hop every couple of years. Like you spent about 8 years at Ritual, would you recommend staying for that length of time at a company, or like what are the pros and cons of doing that?
on. Yeah, so I mean, I'll start with what I've read about job hopping, which is that if you want to make the most money, you should job hop every 2 years. So, I mean, if you care about the financial reward, I guess that's probably still true. I
Mm,
think one of the reasons I stayed was because there was a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity and a lot of learning. right? So every year I was there, I did something different. And so, I started off as just writing the iOS app, and then I was our mobile or our iOS team lead, then our mobile team lead, and then I was,
Mm,
in charge of one of our teams for product features, and I was in charge of all of product engineering. And so like every year it was a different growth, right? And like I mentioned before, I learned by doing. So to me, that was amazing opportunity and amazing chance. So I think it all depends on what you value. And I know I'm answering a lot of questions of it depends on what you want, and I'll give you perspectives, but I do think it's very individual in terms of like, what do you want out of your career, and what do you want out of your goals and life and stuff like that. So I think if you're learning a lot, and you definitely, then, I can take that opportunity that I spent there for such a long time, and I would say that I'm now in a position where I am in a job that I like, and I've had that opportunity because I spent the time there, right? If I jumped every 2 years, it's possible that I might be in the same spot. I don't know.
mm,
But I will say that I know that I was able to get to where I was because of the growth and the opportunity I had for that time. So
mm,
um, I also think that if you really want to dig in and learn something, like, 6 months at a company is a very small amount of time. You're just kind of learning how the company works. A year at a company and things like that. But if you're really looking to like learn and grow, and talking about having a mentor, right, and learn from these people,
mm.
if you're not there for very long, then you're not likely to gain as much, I would say. So um, yeah, I mean, what would I recommend for length of time? I think as long as you're learning and growing, I don't
Mm.
see why you would leave unless there was some very strong incentive to do so.
Yeah, and as Tulio Fernandez said in the chat, he's like, learn or earn or hop out if you're not getting any. So I like that, learn or earn, Ideally you can do both. I think that's a good line actually. And yeah, in my experience, obviously I'm a recruiter, right? So my career is different, but like I talk to engineering directors. We actually had one of the first in our first event, we had Niall. He was like the head of engineering, is the head of engineering at Perpetua, and he was saying that you learn a lot more like the longer you stay in a role, and it probably gives you the skills that you need to kind of job hop to really take advantage of that monetary benefit later on, right? But again, everybody's situation is different, and every I guess role is different, right? If you're truly not learning in a role, then it probably doesn't make sense to stay there. It probably makes sense to kind of go look elsewhere, right? And I think we've got time for one last question. So Wesley had kind of asked, after why did you feel after like three and a half years that it was time to leave Google? Like, what about that time had you willing to kind of take this chance on like I guess at that time, small company like Ritual?
Yeah. Well, it helps. So it helps that I had interned with the people who started Ritual before. I interned at a previous company they ran, so I knew them and I was comfortable with making that choice. But I would say that for me, in this, I identified that I learned by doing, and going to a startup was going to give me a lot more opportunity to try and do things on my own and create things and make plenty of mistakes on the way, but give me the chance to do that where I could learn and grow. So Google's great. They got a lot of infrastructure, a lot of great, smart people there to learn from. But there are processes in place for good reason. They're a large company, and they will support you, and they'll give you plenty of ways to learn and grow and do things that are I would say safer. Right? There's going to be books to read and courses to take.
Mm,
I was given a chance to like, hey, you want to go run our iOS app? And our iOS team was like, sure. I've never had to build an entire iOS app by myself at a production scale for a company. Let's go do that. And I think that was just to me an opportunity that was great.
yeah, cool. And again, it's like circumstances always different, but I think having that, knowing the people probably made you feel a lot more comfortable, kind of willing to take that risk, right? And you spent 3.5 years at Google, so it's like worst case scenario, it doesn't work out. Like, you can always lean on that and be like, well, I spent a good chunk of time in this other role. Yeah.
Yeah, we did joke about that frequently in the first year. We said, if we shut down, we'll just go back to what we were doing before.
Yeah, worst case scenario, we'll go back, right? That's funny about life. And knock on wood, worst case doesn't usually happen. And unfortunately, we're out of time. So, Michael, thank you very much for kind of your presentation. I think I got a lot out of it. I hope everybody else in the audience got a lot out of it as well. But yeah, you're all done for this evening. So, thank you very much, and yeah, you have a great night.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, and so next up is, yeah, great presentation by Michael. A lot of really good information. Sorry we couldn't get all the questions. But yeah, some really great info. So moving along now, we've got our next speaker. So that would be Izaaz Yunus. He's a staff software engineer at Amplitude. So for Izaaz, after graduating from his master's in computer science, he joined Microsoft where he spent 7 years, moving from a software development engineer all the way through to an engineering manager position. So during his time at Microsoft, he was able to touch on like a lot of different projects, help solve a lot of different problems. Some of the core ones were related to the analytics platform, notifications, infrastructure, and the Microsoft Store, and others. But just over a year and a half ago, he actually moved to Amplitude. Amplitude's like a product intelligence platform that provides digital product tools that basically helps teams run and grow their business. And in his current role, he works on the ingestion system. This system is responsible for bringing all the information onto the system, and he is in charge of making sure that basically all the data that comes into Amplitude comes in as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So, without any further ado, I will bring Izaaz up onto stage right now. So please give him a warm welcome. And I will do that right now. All righty.
Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you. I guess they all can too. So the floor's all yours. I'll let you have it.
Thank you, Riley. Hey, folks. Like Riley mentioned, my name is Izaaz. I'm currently a staff engineer at Amplitude. And yeah, Amplitude is basically a system that lets customers instrument their apps and see how their customers are actually using their app and make your product better. So today's agenda is going to be around my career path, what is generally beyond a senior engineer. So what does it take to go beyond a senior engineer, the skills that you want to develop, then finally the staff engineer promotion, and finally we'll leave some time for questions. So just a bit background about me. I graduated way back in 2010, and I graduated with a master's degree in software engineering back in India, and I was actually fortunate enough to actually join Goldman Sachs right after my graduation. I worked there for about 2 years. Though Goldman Sachs is a financial company, they actually had amazing technical problems to solve, and I actually learned quite a lot in those 2 years. After a couple of years, I decided I wanted to go and pursue further higher studies or move to US. And the option back then was to do a master's in the US. So I ended up coming to the US. Since I already had a master's in software engineering, I figured I'll try something new. I decided to pursue game development. I studied development for a couple of years, and I had fun time doing that. But at the end of my course, I completely ignored whatever I learned and joined Microsoft as a just another software engineer. And most of my career has been at Microsoft. I spent a good 7 years over there. I went all the way from a level one engineer all the way to an engineering manager in that 7 years. And I built tools for the App Store. I built financial systems that handle bank and tax and multi-billion-dollar payments. And finally, towards the end, I was actually a manager of the team, which was actually building bank and tax systems. About 7 years later, I decided to go to a smaller company, and Amplitude was a company which I had used before. So I figured, why not go and work for a smaller company that whose product I enjoy using. So I ended up joining Amplitude as a staff engineer. And one of the reasons I moved back to a staff engineer was mostly because I had a kid, and I just wanted more control over my calendar. As a manager, you kind of lose that. So which is why I jumped back into an IC role. And for the last 1.5 years, I've actually been a staff engineer at Amplitude, building high volume systems. So what's beyond a senior engineer? So one thing you'll probably notice is up until senior engineer, right? Your promos are more predictable. You can actually it's you the promo from an SD2 to a senior is a lot more easier from a senior to a staff. And generally, when you talk about a staff promo, you'll get this feeling that it's supposed to be a lot more harder. And I'm just going to take a stab at why that feeling exists. And one of the reasons that actually exists is because until a senior engineer, right, you're given a problem, you go solve it, you're amazing at actually going and solving those problems, build amazing systems, maintainable systems, and all that. But to go beyond a senior engineer, right, you can no longer work individually. And actually, there's only so much that you can actually do working individually. So now you actually have to get to a point where you can build those systems a much bigger system, but you actually need a team of people to actually work with. And the moment you have a team of people to work with, you run into all sorts of problems. For example, you now have to manage projects, which means how do you make sure you're on track? The product manager comes in and tells you a new feature has to be developed out before the go live. How do you actually handle that scope creep? Suddenly deadlines have changed. How do you handle those things? There's so many uncertainties that come when you handle people and projects, that you now have to you now need to be a little bit more proficient in handling these things as well. Then there's things about road mapping, right? So you have a bunch of, you have 5 engineers, for example, right? And you have so many things that you want to develop. How do you make sure, how do you prioritize that feature A should be developed, feature B should not be developed? Or how you have a lot of tech debt, right? How do you prioritize and convince people that you got to work on tech debt? How do you manage your backlog? So then there's also chaos management. Chaos management is things, it's so chaotic at that level. Basically, the priorities change, the customer escalations come in, incidents happen. When all these things happen, right, they completely destroy the rhythm of the team. And how do you actually respond to that chaos is one more thing that you have to learn. And finally, it's also people management. How do you manage careers? How do you manage team morale? How do you mentor folks to unlock their full potential? Generally, depending upon the company that you are in, most of these things are handled by an engineering manager. But generally, an engineering manager and a staff engineer are generally roles that you can switch easily between. And so once you come to a staff engineer, you are expected to be able to at least do a bunch of these things, if not all. And that's the reason why the maturity which is expected of a staff engineer tends to be a little bit more different compared to what you see in senior or lower engineers. The Apart from the skills that were mentioned over there, right, the bare minimum skills that I feel that are required to actually make yourself effective as a staff engineer, right? And how you can actually develop those skills. The first thing is business context. At the end of the day, you're working in a business. You got to understand how the business work, how your customers work, and only then you can actually make good decisions. For example, one common interview question is, how do you build a system to upload profile pictures? And now, if you didn't have the business context, you might build a system wherein you upload a profile picture, and the very next second, every single person is able to see a profile picture. But then, if you understand the business context, you realize that it doesn't matter that as soon as you upload a picture, even if it takes 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes for the profile picture to be available, right? It is not at the end of the day. It is not the end of the world. So then, just knowing that context, you will come up with completely two different solutions, and one is definitely better from the business perspective than the other. So just understanding the business context, no matter which company you are in, actually helps you a lot in making good decisions. And one way I tend to do that is join as many customer calls as possible. You hear the customer's perspective and a bunch of problems that they see. It actually helps you understand the kind of problems that they face, and you actually make much better decisions once you get that context. The second thing is managing projects. Until now, you were able to go and do your project by yourself and make sure things don't slip through the cracks, right? But the moment you work with a team, you got to make sure that every single person's work is actually being tracked, nothing's slipping through the cracks, all the requirements are being worked on. Everyone who's working on the project has the same vision that you have. How do you actually convey that to the team? How do you actually make sure things are working as expected? And until now, a lot of developers generally hate like task management softwares like Jira and all those, right? But at this level, Jira becomes your best friend. It's the most convenient way to actually track how the work is being done. The other thing that you can do is watch and learn from other engineers. There are other staff engineers or managers who actually manage projects. See how they do it. See what they actually, how they manage projects. What happens when something unexpected comes in, and how do they react to those situations? The third thing is something called, this was a concept I heard of Microsoft. It's called force multiplication. This was probably the most difficult thing that I had to learn. Uh, when you get to a staff engineer, it's not that you solve more and more complex problems, right? It's the complexity of the problems is probably about the same, but the thing that happens is now you actually have a team of people that you're managing the problem with. There are senior engineers who love solving problems, and you want to be able to give them the opportunity to go and solve those problems as well, right? So one skill that you have to develop is being able to trust your team to actually go and solve those problems themselves as well, and guide them when they need that guidance. And generally, your identity is so linked to going and solving all these complex problems that when you have to give up on that identity, it's a very hard thing to actually give up. And this was one thing that I learned when I became a manager. I absolutely had no time to go and be involved in all the decisions that were being made. And it came to a point I had to trust the team to actually go and deliver on those projects. And at the end of the day, projects delivered, customers were happy, nothing broke, and everything worked fine. And once you cross that level and gain that trust, it's a beautiful feeling. It's knowing that your team is capable of actually going and solving all those problems, and all you got to do is guide them. Finally, the fourth thing is decision making. Decision making is exhausting. The more and more as there are more and more people who now come to you to expect you to make decisions, and you can't be in every single place and make all the possible decisions. It's again, you got to trust them in making decisions, and you also have to empower them to actually make decisions on their own. And for example, at Amazon, one of the principles is customer comes first, right? So one of the reasons why they have those principles is because when you want to make a decision and you realize the customer is being impacted, you use that as your guardrail to figure out how to make a decision, and you trust that your team will actually make those decisions. So in your company, you also you want to find those, you want to come up with those principles that help your team make those decisions, and make sure that, yeah, you empower them to actually make those decisions themselves. The other thing to understand is reversible versus irreversible decisions. You only have so much of bandwidth to actually go and make decisions. So it's important to understand at what point you want to make quick decisions, and at what point you actually want to go and take it a little slow and make those decisions. For example, if you want to use JUnit 4 versus JUnit 5, no, it's fine. Just pick one and go with it. Nothing's going to happen, right? But apart from that, instead of that, if you want to go and design a system from scratch, at that point you want to spend a lot more time thinking about how each component works, and how do you define the boundary for those components. So over there, you want to spend a little bit more time. And finally is keeping things simple. As engineers, one common thing I've noticed is when we go on design discussions, right, we passion flows out of our design discussions, and we tend to complicate systems more than what they're supposed to be. We start imagining those requirements, and we say we build a system that's probably going to scale 100 years in the future as well, right? But generally what happens is that tends to complicate systems. So how do you actually build systems to keep them simple? Because the simpler a system is, the easier it is to actually maintain those systems. So generally, my rule of thumb is, if a requirement, I don't see the requirement coming in the next 3 months, I don't worry about the requirement and focus on the requirements at hand. And 95% of the time, the requirements don't even come in, and nothing breaks. And let's assume that you've built all these skills, and now you're working towards your staff engineer promotion, right? This so there are a few things that you can do to actually make that promo process easy. The first and foremost is, every company tends to have a different promo process. It's extremely important for you to understand what that process looks like in your company. For example, the promo process at Microsoft is so much more different from the promo process at Amplitude that I can't apply what I learned at Microsoft at Amplitude right now. The values that they value, the values which they value, are so much more different. So you want to find all those values, and you want to work towards that. You want to find opportunities that align with what the company expects from a staff engineer, and you want to find such projects like that. The second thing is, you focus on impact and not on the scale or complexity. For example, let's say a build take 5 minutes to run, and you go and do something awesome to actually make it run in a minute. Now, if no one's complaining about it, you going and solving a problem has doesn't have that much of an impact, because you might have done something really complex to make it to 1 minute, but there are not that many people who care about that problem yet. Whereas, let's say a build was taking half an hour to run, and you go and bring that down to 5 minutes. When the build is running for half an hour, everyone's complaining about it, and you going and solving the problem has a much higher impact. So when you work on something, you got to make sure that the impact is high enough for you to work on. And the second thing is, make sure it aligns with the organization's priority. For example, if you go and work on something and deliver something which is not aligned with the organization's goals, during the promo process, it's going to be hard for your manager to justify that you need a promo, because it's not aligning with any goals which the company is working towards. The third thing is, a lot of times we tend to expect the manager to actually take care of a promo process, and we just hope that when the time comes, the manager will push us for a promo. But generally, like you saw in the previous slides, right, there are so many things that a manager is normally busy with. Anything that you can do to make your manager's job easy with the promo process will go a long way. Like, if in case you want to align, if you want to make a deck of saying what all you worked on, what impact it had, and just giving it to your manager, right? So it's easier for the manager to go and present it forward. Is going to make your promo process a lot more easy. your manager is meant to guide you through your career, but not exactly drive your career. So you pushing over there generally tends to help as well. And finally, this is the last resort. If nothing works, you have the options of switching teams or switching companies. And generally, I keep this as the final resort, mostly because as you grow in seniority, right, the more and more you've got to spend a lot more time in the company to be effective. For example, when I moved from Microsoft to Amplitude, it took me a good 6 to 8 months to gain the business context in Amplitude so that I could actually have a positive impact. And when you every single time you move companies, that gets reset. So, uh, but there are valid reasons why you might want to do it. For example, one common reason that you get is there is no business need for a staff engineer. It's a little hard to understand that from a staff engineer perspective, but imagine your team already has a manager. Now, that even though you're awesome at you've been awesome manager, there's absolutely no need for a different manager to be there in the team, right? So there is no business need for a new manager. So in those cases, what you do is you could either find another team within the company which needs the skills that you want, and you go and move to that team, or if not, go and find some other opportunities outside of the company to actually make that process a little more easier. But generally, I prefer this to be my last resort. If nothing works out, this is probably your go-to thing to get a promotion. That was all the content that I had. I think the next slide is basically any questions, and if in case you're looking for a mentor, feel free to just ping me on LinkedIn and just mention this session so I know who the person is as well.
Cool, awesome, great work, nice presentation, Azaz. I especially like the point about making the PowerPoint for your boss so you can help get promoted. I think that's honestly, I think that's probably perfect. Like as a manager, it's like I'm just thinking it's hard to remember everything that happens in the year. So if someone comes to you with a deck and they're like, "Here's what I did, X, Y, Z," it makes your life easier.
Absolutely,
Has
yes.
anyone ever done that? Did you do that by chance?
I started doing that towards the end. So what I would do is I had notes of every single month what all I worked on, and then I would give a it's the man it's easy for the manager to forget what all you did in the last 6 months or 1 year. And so
Mm,
then I would just give a notes of these are all the projects that I worked on. This is all the impact that the project has had. Use this for your promo. There was also one time where my manager wanted to try that out, wherein they have a style of presenting. So they said,
mm.
"This is the card I have to present. Go and fill in with whatever content that you want and give it to me." And
Okay.
then because it's possible that the manager forgets about things, right? So it's your
Mm,
opportunity to go and showcase what you've done. And it's easy to not put an effort over there, but you've got to realize that that's what is deciding your promo. So
right.
making that your top priority and focusing on that and actually doing a good job at that is important.
I think that's yeah, honestly, I think it's just like it's the path of least resistance. You make it easy on them. So I think that's great. So now in terms of the questions, we'll jump into it. So Aaron asked, I'll put it up on the screen here so we can see it. But how do you handle the engineer or projects that are slipping? Yeah, how do you handle the engineer or projects that are slipping through the cracks? Like, do you have tactical advice on how to realign the project without having to jump into the project as an individual contributor?
So generally, this is where the project tracking tools help you, right? So generally, you've got to break down the problem into multiple smaller parts, and then it's easy to handle the smaller parts. Then what you do is you realize that if the smaller parts are taking much longer, you know that the project itself is going to take longer. and
Mm,
and honestly speaking, no one's going to complain that the project is going to take longer to finish, right? The expectation is that you can't estimate how long things are going to take, and things are going to take longer. And the best thing that you can do is keep the stakeholders informed as early as possible so that they can come up with an alternate plan of what happens when things go south. And generally, what some suggestions that generally things that we would do is, if in case a project is going to take longer, right, we find ways to trim the project. For example, let's say there was a feature A and feature B that you had to develop. So then you basically go and cut down on feature B to say, you know what, we'll go live with feature A. We'll work on feature B as a V1.1 improvement on top of feature A. So these are the most important thing is when you realize the project is slipping, don't go deeper and try to work harder to make it aligned. Make sure your stakeholders are informed that this is slipping, and so you can come up with a common solution to actually solve that problem.
yeah, that's a great idea. I think a lot of times communication, again, I'm not an engineer, but I think in any work, if things are going to slip, at least communicating that early and often is like is a really good strategy. Okay, and then moving on, Haresh had asked, how do one-on-ones with your manager change as you go from like senior to staff plus?
Yeah, so generally, as you go from senior to staff plus, right, it's your one-on-ones are no longer about you're expected to drive your career is expected to be driven by yourself. Your manager is more your peer at this point of time. It depends upon who you report to at one time. So if you're reporting to a peer of yours, right, your manager is going to be it's going to be harder and harder for your manager to drive your career. So generally, the conversations are more about the direction that you want to go in. Talking with your manager, see, you know what, these are all the different projects that we're working on. These are higher priority ones. These are problems that we're seeing. How do we go and solve those problems? It's more the conversations tend to be a little bit more strategy oriented as opposed to just
Mm,
giving status updates. And generally, you now have start having a better connection with your skip as well, because your skip is a person who might be more who might be able to help you more with your career. So you also having more frequent conversations with your skip, and over there your skip tends to help you with the career more as well. Sorry,
right. No. And sorry, Skip is like manager or is
the
that
skip would be my manager's manager. It could be a
right?
senior manager, director, or whoever it is.
Got you, got you. Okay, interesting. Yeah. And then from there, I'll double down on Harish. She's got another question, or they've got another question. How do you prioritize improvements to internal developer experience versus other considerations?
Yeah, my personal thing over there is how many people complain. It's is it one person complaining that, oh, you know, the bills are taking too long, or is it 10 people complaining? And that's the if it's one person, it could just basically be that person's personal preference, right? And if there are 10
Mm,
people complaining, you know it's actually a problem. The
mm.
second thing you want to do is how big is that problem, right? And is it something that people
Ooh, is Azaz may have frozen. I don't know if that's an Azaz thing, but oh,
can
I'm just gonna do. Yeah, I think Azaz, you've frozen. Oh, you're back now.
okay, I don't know which
Yeah,
one. So generally, once you get a sense of what those technical problems are, you want to go and figure out how that fits in your backlog. It's not something that can be done immediately, but if the impact is high enough, you tend to actually squeeze in and say, you know what, these features can probably have to wait, and you convince stakeholders to say, we want to work on this technical improvement, and that's how you end up prioritizing that. And
Mhm.
generally, depending upon the company, companies tend to understand that you've got to work on tech debt. And especially if you see that on call is becoming extremely hard, right, you realize that you can't sustain in that level. So at that point, even the leadership is more committed to giving you time to focus on those problems and put the feature development on pause.
Okay, awesome. Great question. Glad my heart stopped when we lost you there for a while. So glad, glad you made it back. Aurora had a question. Oh, actually, it was sorry. I want to just kind of go in process here. But yeah, Tulio asked, what is the mindset change that needs to happen from like a staff to a manager?
From a between a staff and a manager, I think the mindset is fairly similar. It's as a manager, you have a lot more people management as well, right? So how do you actually you'll you'll be lesser and lesser involved in design discussions and more involved in people management, chaos management, people management. So your skill set over there tends to be a slightly different from a staff engineer. So how do you keep the morale of the team happy? Your developers complain that, you know what, hey, my pay is not sufficient. What do I do, and how do you keep them happy at that point of time, right? So your the problem set that you have as a people as a manager is mostly around people and lesser around technical problems, because you already have senior engineers who can go and design all the systems. It's about
Mm.
keeping people happy, keeping stakeholders informed, and things like that.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Um, Thank you, thank you. And then Marson's asked, like, have you like had a plateau in your career, or was there a skill that was hard for you to learn? And like, how did you go about solving that?
uh the skill that I had to learn, I think, when you move from an IC to a manager, it completely throws you. It's a completely different skill set that you need. And the first 6 to 8 months, or actually even the first 1.5 years at Microsoft, right, when I became a manager, I think it was rough, right? It was I was still working as an IC. I still had the expectations of being a manager, my manager kept telling me that you don't have to work as an IC, right? But it was so hard for me to give up on my identity and start becoming a
Mm,
people manager. So that transition was extremely hard. It took a while to get used to it. It 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 was rough, right? But at the end of the day, you learn how to give up on your technical responsibilities and learn your people management responsibility. That was probably the toughest transition I've actually had to have. And generally, I've noticed that being an IC tends to be a lot more easier than being a people manager.
mm.
And yeah.
And how did you go? Because you mentioned it was really tough for you. Like, what was there a moment, or was there moments that built up? Like, at what stage did you were you able to kind of like fully commit to becoming a manager? Or like, how did you
it
even learn to do that? You know?
it I always wanted to be a manager, so my manager gave me the opportunity to become a manager. I think there's one time that you realize that you cannot do everything. And
Mm,
once you get that realization, right, that's the point where you know that you can't do everything. So you've got to drop a few things to be able to sustain. And that level of when you get that enlightenment, that's when it starts becoming
mm,
a bit more easier. And this was the point I learned how to trust my team, right? I wasn't able to go and design all the systems by myself because I was doing that as
mm,
a senior engineer. So then learning that you can trust your team, let them actually go and solve the problems. And the way I learned that was not by reading some books or something, right? It was more about there was a project that had to be delivered. I absolutely didn't have time. I just had a kid. I was completely burnt out at that point of time.
mm,
And my team actually went and built it themselves, right? So that's the moment I realized that all I had to do was trust my team and they'll be able
mm,
to deliver. And that enlightenment is actually what started making things a lot more easier.
mm.
And you got to just trust your team and hold them accountable, and they'll actually do wonders.
That's a really fun moment, honestly, and it's probably one of those moments where yeah, like you can't be you're starting a family, and then your team goes and builds something, and it almost surprises you a little bit, but you're like, wow, proud, right? But it gives you
Yeah,
confidence in them. And
exactly.
I'm so sorry. We'll do one more question. Just and then we've got to kind of move on to Chris here. But
Mhm.
so Aaron asked during one-on-ones outside of my manager or with non-engineers. I find the discussions focus on the outgoing projects in my team. How do I move the focus of the conversations towards understanding the business? It seems that solving business problems rather than technical problems is a critical difference between senior and staff engineer.
I see. I would. My hunch is that it depends on how frequently you talk with them, right? If you're talking with them once a quarter or extremely rarely, right, then what happens is I'm guessing they have a bunch of questions that they want to ask you about what projects that are going on, and they might just be focusing on that. But the moment you have a little bit more frequent conversations, right, you will realize that those questions go away. Then you also have a chance to ask your questions and just get a pulse of how things are going. So generally, the way one thing that I would tend to do is uh, find all the program managers in different teams that you commonly work with and set up recurring one-on-ones with them, and not just a one-off one-on-one, right? So you have recurring one-on-ones with them, keep talking to them on a weekly basis, just understand what the problems that they are facing, and that over time the conversation actually evolves into both of you talking about the problems that exist in the space. That's one thing. Outside of your people in the company as well, right? If you have access to customer videos wherein any recordings that the product manager has with customers, right, you go and look at those videos. So next time you talk to that product manager, go and ask questions around those videos as well, and that tends to give you some more context on the business as well.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Izaaz. Everybody, big round of applause. This was his first ever presentation. So history in the making, and you nailed it. Thank you so much. But
Thank you,
yeah,
folks.
you have a great night. All right, take care. Okay, yeah, big props. First presentation. I didn't want to mention it before. I didn't want to have any jitters, but I think he did a great job. So thank you, everybody. Sorry we weren't able to get all of the questions. Just want to make sure things are on mostly on track here. So now, last but certainly not the least, we've got Chris Price. He's a senior staff engineer at Antimatter. So, after graduating with his master's in mathematics from the University of Waterloo, Chris worked in a few positions before joining Docker in 2019. Once in Docker, he was responsible for owning the technical aspects of the Docker products and was promoted from a senior engineer to actually the director of engineering. He then left Docker to join Antimatter, and that's where he's working at the moment. Antimatter is a data security company that provides cryptographic infrastructure services to B2B SaaS companies. And at Antimatter, Chris is responsible for working on a system that lets the customer of a SaaS hold an encryption key that allows them to protect their data. He's working on the core microservices architecture. I don't quite know exactly what that means, but with that being said, please welcome Chris to the stage.
Thanks, Riley.
Oh,
Yeah, and thank you to TekRek for hosting this, and thanks to the other speakers. I actually learned a thing or two by listening to you guys, and we will have some differences of opinion, but I think that's a good thing. So I don't want to spend too much time on the about me part of this because Riley just went over it, but I have my bachelor's in computing, my master's in math. I actually started out working in networking. I kind of fell into it. It was like the only job I could get when I came out of school. And so I worked on, monitoring appliances. I worked on connectivity appliances. I worked on security appliances. And then, that was a great opportunity for me to sharpen my skills. You had to know Linux, know C and C++. You had to know networking, which I think are some of the most important parts of computing, and turn me into a systems developer, which I've been ever since. Really, my big break was getting in at Docker. I just happened to meet the people who were running the Docker team in the town where I live. And so it was kind of an inflection point for me because the sad truth is that name recognition matters and Docker is ubiquitous. So having that on your resume gives you a lot of credibility, even if you didn't earn it. So that helps me get my foot in the door pretty much anywhere I want to go. And then, like Riley mentioned, I went into management. It wasn't really something I was so keen on, but, I had a good relationship with my boss and he wanted me to do this. So I did it. And, I don't regret it. I didn't really enjoy it, but I gained a lot of perspective by being in management and seeing the other side of the coin than being an engineer. And I think it really helps me having that on my resume because, when a manager sees that, then they know that I know the pain that they go through on a daily basis. Eventually, I had the opportunity to join Antimatter as employee number 7. And I just viewed it as a great opportunity to get back into development, which is what I wanted to be doing. Leverage my experience to help set up the code base, help set up the processes, and, help things run more smoothly. And so I joined. And just a brief disclaimer, you may not agree with me. Your mileage may vary. This may not work. If you follow my advice, it might not work for you. And maybe it's not even the things that did work for me. And certainly the other speakers had differences of opinion. So I will start by just talking about what is a staff engineer. And, Michael made a really good point, which is it depends on the company, like what stage and maturity your company is at. The responsibilities that will get delegated to a staff engineer are different. But, I think that there's some general commonalities, and these are them. So the scope or the difficulty of your work will be increased. You need to write a kernel module, probably going to the staff engineer. You need to work across teams to implement authentication and authorization for all of your services, probably going to a staff engineer. And they'll probably have to work with all those teams. Doing long-term planning, architecture, and design reviews, that's going to go to the staff engineer as well. At the same time, your work is a little bit less defined. So, I might have a 5-minute talk with my boss, and he will assign to me a month worth of work in 5 minutes. Then I have to go away and spend time breaking that down, turning it into tickets, talking to other engineers or other people from other parts of the business so that I can kind of understand what needs to be done, and then maybe collaborating with others to actually implement it. But the point is that, your boss trusts you to get it done, that they can just say, go do this, and that you'll consult them if and when you need to. More autonomy, or put another way, more rope to hang yourself. So you have to deliver larger pieces of work without requiring your manager to intervene. And you're managed more on like a monthly or quarterly basis instead of a daily or a weekly basis or whatever it is when you're more junior. Having awareness of the business was something that everybody else spoke about, but knowing the org structure, being able to work with other areas, being able to handle stuff that's coming from sales or coming from marketing or whoever else, customer support. And your work, you're always relating your work back to the business objectives. And I saw one of the questions previously was about that. So like you're always thinking about, okay, what is the business actually trying to achieve with this work? And what about this work actually matters to the business and what doesn't? Of course, you have to be a technical leader as well. So that means, doing a lot of code reviews, which are usually an unpopular task, mentoring more junior developers, and generally being an excellent troubleshooter, like being able to spot the problem pretty much right away. Gently guiding the evolution of the code base. So, it is what it is, but how do you get it to where it needs to be in a way that doesn't rub people the wrong way? And of course, you yourself should write exemplary code, and you should be a champion for the process that your team has. Like you should set the tone for how your team operates, and people should look up to you. Tighter timelines. Your manager is going to expect you to deliver more in the same amount of time as a more senior engineer, and you're reliable. So they rest easy when you say it's a week. Maybe they say, okay, that's a week and a half, but they know you're going to get it done. And your estimates are more like a promise than an estimate. So you have a very good propensity for like knowing how long something's actually going to take, which I'm sure everybody in this call knows is one of the most difficult things in software engineering. Being cooperative with management. So like you're not a manager, but you're management adjacent. You're like the previous speaker said, you're like a peer to your manager. You should be a little jaded by now, having worked in the business for a while. So like what corners can be cut, what corners can't be cut, and how you can make things happen on a timeline. Like you accept, like you're not the dev that makes problems by saying that's going to take 6 years when your manager says I need such and such in 3 months. You're more of the dev that goes, okay, well, to get it done in 3 months, we can only do this, we can only do this, and we can only do this, and we have to cut a bunch of stuff out of scope. And then fundamentally, it's what you know and how you use it. It's your breadth and depth. It's your ability to apply it and your ability to communicate. So how do you get there? Well, this is my advice. First one is to do things the hard way. So don't take any shortcuts unless you fully understand them. Like, don't go get ChatGPT to do it for you. Don't cut and paste things off Stack Overflow. This should all be obvious, but don't take the shortcuts unless you actually know what you're doing. And then it's fine to use the tools that do things for you and so on. When you face a challenge, learn from that challenge instead of trying to go around it. Remember that your employer is paying for this. It doesn't cost you anything other than a little bit of effort, and you're getting paid while you're doing it. And it's like working out. If you make it hard for yourself consistently every day, it starts to become easy and you'll become much better. And what you view as a challenge, the bar will go up. Work on your communication skills. I can't actually stress this enough because I think that we all neglect our communication skills as technical people. But it's actually critically important, and you will not be promoted to staff engineer. You won't be able to get a job as a staff engineer if you can't communicate well. So, use simple language and be able to communicate with people who are technical as well as people who are not technical. Review code. One of the best things a manager has ever told me is that reading code is harder than writing it. And I think that that's so true. And so, you should review your colleagues' code, but you should also review open source code. Like, if Kubernetes isn't doing something the way you think it does, go read the code and understand why. And that helps you, by better understanding what you're reading, but also you learn clever new tricks when you read other people's code. And when you're reviewing code that belongs to your colleagues, give them actionable feedback, but do it in a respectful way and keep in mind that they've put a lot of effort into this. And it's easy to pick apart somebody's work, but it's hard to do the work yourself. So always be very respectful of that. And don't be the person who holds things up to make it perfect. don't use the changes, don't abuse the changes requested button, and accept that when you make comments on people's code reviews, your advice won't always be followed, and that's okay. Understanding the OS, it's the environment that your application lives in. So you can't really understand your application unless you understand the environment that it lives in. So take some time to understand the OS and what it does. What are the boundaries between your application and the OS? Because that will help you when it comes time to do debugging or working on performance, or in ways that will surprise you. That knowledge will come in handy. For side projects, you're not going to have time to learn all the new technologies as they come up. And there will be teams at work that you interact with who use technologies that you don't understand, but you're not assigned to work on those technologies. So you won't have the opportunity to learn them as part of your day-to-day work. So focus on those things that you don't already know for side projects. For me, it was mostly infrastructure, like learning about Kubernetes and Terraform and things like that. But whatever your weak points are, that's what your side project should focus on. Don't just go home and do the thing that you're already really good at. When you're offered a new opportunity, accept it, even if you don't really want to, because it's not forever. And every new opportunity you take on, you'll gain perspective and grow in your career, even if you're just changing teams with the same role. But it's better to change companies or to change roles than it is to just change teams. Still, though, you will get a benefit from changing teams. And follow people who help you grow your career. If you have a manager that's like constantly trying to give you raises and promotions, that's probably somebody you want to stick with, because they're probably going to keep doing that for you. Don't complain. If you complain, you just make problems for your manager, and then you're like viewed as somebody who just makes problems for their manager. I'll admit it's not easy, because you're working with other people and you don't always get your way, but you just have to suck it up. And especially never ever complain about any of your colleagues for any reason, and because it's not your responsibility as an individual contributor. You're not their manager. Their performance or their behavior is not really your problem, and your manager is not stupid. They can see what's going on. When it comes to like the work that you're handed, it's easy to complain about the timelines or things like that as well, but just do the best you can with what you're given. And somewhat related, don't make excuses. It just makes you look like somebody who's not doing their job. Focus on the business impact. So you're writing code, but you should be thinking about what matters for the business. Because a lot of times, issues that are of technical importance are not actually of business importance at all. So you should keep that in mind and think about like what business objective you're trying to achieve. Frame your work in terms of that, and remember that like writing a line of code is a burden to the business because it has to be maintained. So you should minimize how much code is written and make them count towards what your business is trying to achieve. Changing jobs without guilt. First of all, change jobs. You will need to change jobs to advance your career. You should just accept that right now. There's no way around it. So prepare for that from day one when you're in a new position. You got to write tidy, maintainable, and well-documented code. Think about how it will evolve and plan for it so that when you hand it off to somebody else, it's not a giant garbage fire, for lack of a better term. Then when you leave, somebody who's your junior will be able to take over your code and learn from you. The company will be able to pay them a lesser salary, and you'll move on to bigger and better things, and everybody wins. So there's no guilt to be had. And finally, I would tell you to go towards fear. So look around at the people around you. There's technologies and there's tasks to be done that nobody wants to do. That's an opportunity for you. And the person who can do that task or use that technology very well has a giant advantage over everyone around them. And they also gain new skills in the process. So that's one way to identify things that are a good opportunity. And then I would just leave you with my last word, which is that it's all about the fundamentals. And this quote here is my favorite quote from Larry Wall. who says that real programmers can write assembly code in any language. Cheeky, but true. And, since every language boils down to assembly, you can know programming if you know assembly. It might seem harder initially to learn a fundamental than to learn something that's derived from it, but it actually gives you economies of scale, because once you know the fundamentals, you'll recognize them everywhere, and you'll see how everybody's just using those fundamental building blocks, so that when you look at something, you'll immediately recognize it and you won't have to spend much time learning it. So that is my final word, and I'm happy to take any questions anyone has.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris, for that presentation. And yeah, I gotta, as a manager, okay, we're doing the big screen. Sorry, but as we're doing the manager myself, yeah, it's nice when people know the pain sometimes that they're going through as well, right? So I'm sure that was good. Ooh, we got a question here. So Wesley asked, basically, is there a process for self-development that you follow, or yeah, I guess, is there a process for self-development?
I wouldn't say I have a process. I would just say I try to do my best every day. I try to get as much work done as I possibly can, and I just try to do my best for the business. It's not really complicated. It's just about constantly trying to improve yourself and constantly striving to be better.
Okay, awesome. And is there any areas that you go check out information, or that you stay up to date on, any media sources, or I don't know, to dev influencers? I don't know if that's a
Not really, but I did see an interesting question somebody had about well, how do you, solve a new challenge? It might have actually been Wesley. How do you solve a new challenge that you've never seen before? Honestly, Google, although now I would use ChatGPT to get me started, and then I would use Google. So I would kind of ask it some questions and get it to tell me the principles. And then I would go look up all the principles and try to understand those and apply them to the problem.
Interesting. Okay, very cool. Next up, we got Susanna. So Susanna asked if you could go back in time to when you first joined Docker, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, that's a tough question. If you had asked me before Docker, I would say don't waffle on joining Docker, because I waffled. But I did join, and then yeah, I guess I would give myself the piece of advice to accept new opportunities, because I had a ton of new opportunities presented to me, after joining Docker, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do them or accept them, and realizing that nothing lasts forever, and you can just suffer for a while through something. It still gives you that experience, it still gives you that perspective, and it still makes you grow as a person. So I guess that's the advice I would give.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Take good even during, I guess, challenging times and whatnot, right? So Omar has asked, what would you do before starting a new role at a company?
So if this question is, I've already accepted the job, I assume, and I'm going to start, I would try to understand, who their customers are, what's their value. I would try to understand kind of what's the value of the product to the customer, or in the case of a startup, what does the company believe the value of their product will be to the customer. I would try to understand the org structure, but I think you can't really do that before you start a role. You have to do that after you start a role. And then I guess I would bone up on any technical, you already, by the time you've accepted the job, what language they use and the technologies and stuff, or I hope you do, or you can ask them. I would spend a little time boning up on that if I wasn't already comfortable.
Yeah, good. Yeah, obviously good advice, getting the lay of the land with the org chart and whatnot. In terms of the next question, I really like the change jobs advice. You go into it knowing that you're going to change jobs. I think sometimes it's hard to think about that. But how important is the interest in the business domain for you? Would you be willing to work in something uninteresting?
Yeah, that doesn't bother me at all. I just a lot of very boring businesses have very interesting technical problems associated with them. And
Mm,
it really, I don't think I've ever worked in a job that didn't have interesting technical problems. So the business domain doesn't really matter, but it matters, insofar as you need to understand it to be able to, focus your work and understand what you're trying to accomplish.
mm. Okay, good. Yeah, got some hearts there. So Aaron's asked what the difference, basically, what's different in the recruiting process between senior and staff engineer? Like upgrading from senior to software, so I guess to staff through a job change seems harder than an internal promotion.
I don't think that's true. You have a lot of leverage when you're changing jobs because the company that's trying to hire you wants you to leave. Like, I'm safe where I am. Why would I leave? So you can leverage that to get what you want. If it's the title or if it's the money or whatever, you can use the fact that, well, I don't have to leave my job. I'm comfortable here. Why would I leave to get what you
Mm,
want? Um, the recruiting process, I don't know. I've only been recruited as a staff or senior staff once. I think these titles are all made up and it doesn't really matter. It's all just, them making people feel special or whatever.
mm, okay. Yeah, no, and it's you would know best because you're in it and you've actually been recruited at those levels. I think a lot of times when companies are working with a recruitment agency, anyways, they're like, but that's because they're paying money to us, right? So, but usually they're like, oh, if we're hiring for a staff, they need to be a staff right now. So, but maybe if they're moving without kind of the fee of a recruitment agency, then they might be more willing to kind of like have someone move from more senior if they're doing staff like responsibilities into a staff role, right?
Yeah, I would just say that like one man senior is another man's staff. Like that's why I
Mm,
say it's made up because the lines are so blurry. Like each company has their own way of classifying these things.
mm. Yeah, honestly, truly. And like the title, and yeah, there's so much that goes into it. I couldn't agree more. So Grev's asked, how would you like basically how do you handle the work-life balance and avoid burnout at the staff engineer level?
Actually, work-life balance and burnout is a bigger problem before you get there,
Oh,
because you have to do a lot of work to like get to the point of being staff. But once you get there, you already have built up your knowledge base to the point that
oh.
it's I'm not going to say it's easy, but you're not having to spend like I can remember spending like days and nights just trying to understand this or that thing, and I don't have those problems anymore having like
Mm,
spent all that time learning all that stuff. So but avoiding burnout on your way here, find something else you like to do. I like to work out to blow off stress, and if something like that works for you, don't neglect that and don't feel
mm,
bad about taking a little bit of time to do what you need to do to feel better.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. Like honestly, I think that's just good advice for kind of life in general. It's like to make sure that you got other things and whatnot if you can. So then I think the last question so far, we got James. So you mentioned that Docker was like a big part of your career. Like what, and you mentioned you may not have wanted to go to Docker, but like what had you done prior to Docker that prepared you for that step?
um like Docker is a systems heavy application. So
Mm,
all the work that I did on systems is what made me ready to like understand fundamentally what is a container and how do they work,
mm,
because that's what Docker is and that's what you need to understand. So like I kind of got lucky because when I came out of school, nobody wanted to hire me because I didn't do co-op, until I met these guys who appreciated my like passion, and they hired me to work on their Linux networking appliance. And so I had to
mm,
know like how to put together the root file system and image it onto the disk, and we were programming everything in C. So like it kind of, you were so close to the kernel that knowing like what the kernel does and what you do was kind of easy. And
mm.
then it was just from there, it's not a big step to understanding like Docker and containers.
Right. Okay, cool. It's funny how life works, right? Like it's like you get this job kind of doing Linux, and then all of a sudden it allows you to kind of probably helped you get that job at Docker.
Yeah, definitely.
Another question, staff engineer functions seem to require significant knowledge of the business, stack systems, and OS. How do you handle the knowledge gap when you join a new company as a staff engineer?
Read the code. So I guess that's like the stack part of that question.
Mm.
Obviously, stand it up. I would draw a picture on my whiteboard of all the different components and sort of start to try to understand how they interact with each other. Start reading the code, start taking on tickets. OS is something you can do on your own time. And then the business, I usually just kind of like hound my manager to give me as much information as possible about who they're talking to, what those people are telling them. I try to go to some business oriented meetings to understand what they do. In a bigger company, I would like go to the sales kickoff meetings and stuff like that to see how they talk about the product, review the marketing materials, become friends with the product managers and talk to them as much as you can. Those sorts of things.
Cool. Interesting. Yeah, I'm sure going to the sales event would be pretty interesting. Hear a bunch of non-technical people talking about the product. You're like, I don't know if it could do that, guys, but nice try.
Well, you understand how they're selling it, which is a very important part.
Yeah, no doubt. And then Graham kind of asked, like, and I guess I don't know if you're able to answer this, but like, how does the scope change from staff to principal? And I know, sometimes titles mean different things at different places, but like as a general kind of comment, how would you see that scope change?
I think you would do less programming in a principal job, more writing of tickets, like kind of defining the direction of things. Like, for example, we have headers on files that are encrypted. The principal would be more like defining what the header looks like, why it looks like that, how we can turn it into an open standard, and so on. And a staff would be more responsible for like further breaking that down and actually implementing it, possibly with other people.
Right. Okay, awesome. Well, that would be it in terms of questions. And Chris, thank you very much for your time. Honestly, it was great hearing your chat, and thank you for taking time out of your evening. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And thank you to the other speakers. I thought it was great.
Awesome. You have a great night. I'll take you off stage now. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for sticking around for the event here. Basically, a big thank you from everybody here at TekRek. We kind of put them on for everyone to get connected. I hope you learned something and you gained something out of this. In terms of kind of what's up next, so my colleague Dan Tomlinson, on May 25th, we got the next event. It's going to be a data-focused event. He's got 3 great speakers lined up. One of the director of global AI and data products from Santa Fe, director of data analytics from Maple, and the director of business intelligence from Paystone. So if you're interested in that kind of information and looking at how I know maybe a different area, but like defining and growing your career in data, please do check us out for that one. But yeah, again, thank you all very much. Have a great night and go Leafs go. I hope everyone has a good one. All right, bye.